Well, it is January. That is for sure. Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for the totally necessary second, or not even the first, the second remake of The Grudge. And, well, this film is about what every other Grudge movie's been about. Basically, there's this curse that's in this house, and if you're there for too long, the curse will affect you. It'll make you, and, you'll end up going insane, or you'll end up murdering people, and eventually you'll end up dead. And we follow a bunch of different stories that have been affected by this curse over the years, and that's really all there is to say. So, look, The Grudge. I mean, obviously, this is the first major release, not just of the year, but of the decade overall, and that's always a red flag. When it comes to the Grudge franchise, though, I don't have a lot to say about it. I've only seen the American remake, so like the first one, the first American remake with Sarah Michelle Gellar. Wasn't really that big of a fan of it. It's nothing terrible, but it's just not something that really did much for me at all. I found it to be pretty boring, honestly. But that being said, I still had a little bit of hope for this movie, mainly because of the director and talent involved, the stacked cast, but also the director, Nicolas Pesce, is a director that I do respect. Even though I did not like his previous film, I do think that he has a lot of talent in him, and I thought he could have brought something legitimately different and maybe bring a fresh voice to this franchise, because honestly, as of late, the first movie in January actually hasn't been that bad. Well, unfortunately, that's the case again, because The Grudge is what you'd expect. This is a terrible, terrible remake that really just overcomplicates things in a really terrible way and is easily one of the biggest clusterfucks already of the entire year. But we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And look, to be honest, I don't have much to say here, because while this cast is very talented, we already know they're talented, there's so many great actors in this movie, they're not really utilized in the way you would want them to be. They don't really have a lot going on acting-wise. Everyone's just kind of serviceable. And these actors are still really, they're good for what they have. John Cho, Betty Gilpin, Andrea Riseborough, Lynn Shaye, Jacki Weaver, all good in the movie. They're all really solid for sure, but they don't really get that one moment where I'm like, oh yeah, they were the standout. I don't really feel like this movie has a standout. I can say that there is one performance that just did not work at all for me, and that's Demián Bichir. I usually really like him, but he just seems so bored in this movie. Every single reaction from him is so half-assed and wooden, and it just feels so muted, and he was the only actor that I legitimately felt like did not do a good job. Everyone else, they're doing fine with what they have, but I can't really say much about them because the movie does not service them that well. The movie does not do a lot to make them stick out as actors. So, I mean, you already know that, like I said, John Cho's a good actor, Betty Gilpin's a good actress, Andrea Riseborough's a great actress. I don't need to say that. The movie does not do much to really showcase that. And you would think with such a talented cast, the movie would try to, it would try to work around that, would try to really cater to that cast, but it really doesn't at all, and that's really one of the biggest things that brings this movie down. The fact that I can't say that there isn't a single actor here that stands out to me really should tell you the type of movie this is. But now we gotta get into the directing and the writing, which, oh boy, where do I even start here? I mean, look, like I said, the one thing I was really holding out hope for when it came to this film, besides the cast, was the director here. Nicolas Pesce, despite the fact that I've only liked one of his movies, and the other one I saw I wasn't a fan of, I still held out hope, because this is a director that has shown before he does have a vision. I thought that maybe he could have done something that justified this film's existence, but unfortunately, it really does not seem like he directed this movie, and here's what I think happened. I don't blame Pesce for this at all. I feel like he had a specific vision. He knew what he wanted to do. But because of the fact that this is a major studio film that's coming out nationwide and is in the first week of January, there was a ton of studio interference. His script was not in line with what most modern horror films are today. It was too different, so they just scrapped it and they went for something completely generic. And because of that, his vision just isn't really well communicated. There are hints that this could have been something deeper. There are hints of what he wanted this to be, but it really did get lost in translation, unfortunately, and it sucks because I do think Pesce is generally talented, and I think I would love to see him do another movie at some point, because again, even though I didn't like his previous film, his directing was definitely not the problem. He still did a good job directing that film. He still very much had a vision there. Here, it just doesn't feel like it was well utilized at all, and it's very disappointing. But the writing here is simply atrocious. It's easily the worst thing about this film. This has to be one of the biggest clusterfucks I have seen in any horror film in such a long time. And look, it kind of stems back to my original problem with the first film, is that there are so many side stories going on in that first film that you just don't get time to really care about any of them. But what I will give that first film is that it at least had a focus. While there were a lot of stories going on that admittedly weren't that great, the Sarah Michelle Gellar one was the clear focus. That was the story we went back to the most. This film, I don't know. I really do not know what the main focus is supposed to be. I think it's supposed to be Andrea Riseborough's character, her character Muldoon, who is this police chief that basically, she is trying to cope with her husband's death, so she's moving out of town with her son, and they're trying to get a fresh new start. But there's barely anything for her. I mean, this has to be one of the worst underservings of a main character that I have seen in such a long time. There's barely anything for her to do other than investigate, question Demián Bichir what's going on, find out some information about the house, or have a nice tender scene with her son. Aside from that, there's nothing. And again, this is supposed to be the main story, and I have to say, out of all the ones in this movie, it's easily the one I cared about the least, because there's really not anything put into this. Muldoon is such a boring character. We don't get any time to really zero in on her and figure out, how is this affecting her? What is she going through? What's happening to her? And again, admittedly, I didn't care about the characters in the original film either, but they at least tried to give them something. They give her literally nothing to do, and it's very, very disappointing because the other stories going on in this film, again, are a little bit more interesting. I will definitely say that. The Lynn Shaye one had a lot of potential. You have this couple where she's suffering from dementia, and, her husband's trying to help her out, but it's gotten to a point where he knows that she's at a point where she's not going to be able to recover from this, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. The problem is, it doesn't feel like a cohesive story. It feels like a series of scenes. It doesn't feel like it is fully put together in that way. And that's again, the biggest problem with this film, is that it kind of feels broken. It really does, because there's so many things that happen in that story that we don't get to see. And Jacki Weaver's character especially, she just is kind of like dropped into this situation when Lynn Shaye is already at her worst, so there's really no story progression there. They really should have started where Lynn Shaye was like at the dawn of starting to, turn and things like that, and starting to get more erratic, but she's not there quite yet, so that way Jacki Weaver's time to bond with her. But because of the fact that Lynn Shaye is already pretty much insane by the time this portion of the movie starts, there's no time for that story to really breathe, and that was disappointing because I saw a lot of potential for where that story could have gone, and I don't think they did a good job with it very much at all. The way it ended especially was so cheap. It really felt like they were just doing everything they could to get to the ending, and especially where we end up going with that storyline, it's so implausible. There's one thing a character says where I was like, wait, what? Do you understand, what you're saying, what you're implying there? It literally makes no sense, and I attribute it to that the writers just didn't care. They did not know how they wanted to wrap up this storyline. It very much does show here. because the way it ends is so abrupt, and I don't think they did a good job with that at all. And then the other storyline we have in this movie, there's two other storylines. One, we see in the beginning, it's never come back to again until the ending. And look, the original was similar where, you know, we have the demon that is haunting everyone, and we don't really find out what happened until the ending. But at least we come back to it every so often. We don't come back to this at all until, like, literally the ending of the movie. You actually forget that I forgot that it happened. I forgot that it wasn't connected to anything else. Like, when it started off, I was very much caught off guard. I was like, all right, what was the point of this? Are we coming back to it? I thought it was Andrea Riseborough for a second. I really did, because they just do not do a good job with setting anything up there. And then the other storyline in this movie, it involves John Cho and Betty Gilpin, and I don't know what the hell it's doing here, to be honest with you. And look, it's a solid story. You have Betty Gilpin, and they find out that they're in this tragedy with their son that's about to be born, you know, and they're kind of coping with that. But it really has no relevance to anything. It's not brought up with the Andrea Riseborough stuff. It's not brought up with the, Lynn Shaye stuff either. It just feels entirely superfluous. I don't understand what the point of it is, other than they just wanted to cram it in there. They wanted to get as much talent as possible, and it very much does seem that way. And there are shot-for-shot recreations in that portion of the movie where they're just not even trying to, like, do something different. It seems like they are, and then they'll do the same exact shot that we had in the first movie with, like, Sarah Michelle Gellar taking a shower, and then the hand comes out from behind her. The same thing happens, you know, that you saw in the trailer with John Cho, and it just doesn't work at all. So again, my problem is not the stories themselves, is that they do not fit together in one large narrative. The film tries to make them work, for sure, but they just don't fit. They all feel separated, and because of that, they all feel like they don't get the proper resolution that they needed, and I think that's what really hurts this movie. If they would have focused on two of them, I think that they could have actually had something good, but because they focused on like 4 or 5 of them, and this movie is already pretty short as it is, it just didn't really fit together in the end, and I think that's really what brings this entire film down, unfortunately. In terms of cinematography, there really isn't much to praise there either, because this film is riddled with basically every single horror cliche you could think of. I mean, there are so many just fake outs in terms of jump scares, but all the jump scares in the movie are terrible. And it's not because of the jump scares themselves, it's because the way they're used, they're so badly handled. I mean, there were points where I legitimately did not know what we were seeing because it's so badly filmed in that way. There's so many just like fast cuts, you know, quick cuts to like just this demon jumping out at this girl, and we don't even get to see it. It's so incompetently handled, and I just did not think cinematography was good here at all. The CGI is especially unconvincing, and they also were trying so hard to, like, make this the more, like, gorier version. It's not convincing for a second. You are not at any point scared in this movie. There's not a single scene that had me even remotely frightened. There was not a single point where I was even thrilled. I don't think there was really any moment in this movie that legitimately scared me, and it's mainly because the film relies on the cheapest tricks possible, and they don't do anything else to try to elevate the story, to try to elevate the scares, and that really brought it down significantly for me. The score by the Noon Brothers, I usually really do like, but it's basically the same exact score from the other movies, so I can't really say much there either. And then the editing, like I said, this movie is so choppily handled. When it decides to cut, especially, it's really bad. There are so many points where it feels like they could have delved more into something, and it really feels like the film was heavily edited as well. Like, they had to have it at 90 minutes because, oh, audiences aren't going to want to watch more than that. But if you've seen, audiences very much do want to see original films. I mean, Ready or Not did pretty well last year from what I remember. Midsummer, even though it was an indie release, it did really well for an A24 film. So audiences are getting smarter. Audiences do want to see original stuff. Escape Room last year did really well. It was an original film. And it wasn't only 90 minutes from what I remember. It actually was like 100 and something. I really do feel this film could have been good if it was like maybe 110 minutes, maybe just a little bit shy of 2 hours. I think we actually could have had something good there, but because the film is so cut down, Nothing feels earned, nothing feels satisfied, and overall it just feels like a giant mess. So again, The Grudge, it's not the worst horror film of the year, but it's just a horror film that I think was so choppily handled. There's so many arcs that just don't fit well together. It wastes such a talented cast, it wastes such a talented director, and overall, it just feels like typical horror schlock. It doesn't do anything to stick out. It doesn't do anything to really redefine the horror genre. It doesn't do anything to justify its existence either, and it has very little resemblance, actually, with the original Grudge, aside from the fact that the, parts of the movie are supposed to be going on while the original film was. Aside from that, there's almost no connection here whatsoever, and so what we have just feels like a giant clusterfuck overall, and I am going to give The Grudge overall a D+. Like I said, these January films have not been as bad recently, so this was definitely very, very unpleasant of a start. I hope this January is not that bad, but this is not great. This is really not great at all. But either way, guys, in my review of The Grudge, let me know what you guys thought of this movie overall, if your thoughts on it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.